Alright, in this lesson we're going to take just a few minutes to really understand and talk about the fundamental differences between some of the different lights that 3ds Max has to offer. Alright, so this particular lesson we're going to do this a little bit more lecture-based, so we're just going to start with a blank scene, and we really won't be building anything, just really talking about some of the different light types found in 3ds Max. So when it comes to actually creating lights, what we first need to do is make sure that we are in the Create menu. Now in the Create menu we can go into the Lights, and we can choose the standard lights. By default, you'll probably be seeing the photometric light types. So we're just going to be focusing on the standard lights. And you can see within 3ds Max, we actually have a few different lights to choose from. We have the target and free spot, the target and free direct, as well as the omni and the skylight. Alright, so as I mentioned, we're really just going to be doing in this particular lesson just a very, very broad level overview on the differences, some of the fundamental differences between these different lights. So if we were to start with something like the Omni light, this is one that is going to be very, very similar to something like a light bulb or some kind of just a point light. So if we were to take a look at just a visual example of this, again, you can see where the Omni is really going to focus itself really just a lot more like a point light or some kind of a light bulb, where we have the actual point of illumination in the center, and then light will get emitted out in all directions from that central location. Alright, now we also have the spotlight. Now within 3ds Max we do actually have two different types of spot. We have the target as well as the free spot. Now these are actually the exact same light with exact same controllers. The only difference is with the target we have one additional controller that will actually allow us to aim where this spotlight is pointing. If we use the free spot, then we have to just rely on rotating the spotlight itself. Again, we'll talk about these a little bit more in our next lesson. But as far as the spotlight itself, again, if we're going to take a look at a visual example of this, we could see where this spotlight is really, again, as the name suggests, going to behave a little bit more like a spot or a searchlight, where we have a specific cone, and we have this very focused area of illumination that's coming from this particular spotlight. Alright, now we also have the ability to use what's called a direct light. And again, just like the spot, we also have the target as well as a free direct. Again, these are the exact same light type. The only difference is with the target direct, we do have some kind of a additional controller that will allow us to actually aim and point this direct light in a specific area. Now, this direct light is a little bit different from the spot or the omni that we've had a chance to look at already. So with this direct light, you can see we're actually getting a little bit different light distribution than what we would normally get with any of our other light types. So with something like the Omni or the Spot, you can see that both of those lights have some kind of a light source that originates from one particular point in space. And then you have your light rays that will radiate outward from that particular spot. And again, we have the same thing with the spotlight, where our rays are actually radiating outward from one point or one spot in space. Now, the direct light behaves a bit differently. So instead of radiating from one particular point or one spot in space, our light rays are all traveling perfectly parallel to each other. So this type of a light is going to be really, really good for simulating some kind of a light source that's going to be very, very, very far away. Something like sunlight would be an ideal choice for this. Now, because these rays are traveling parallel to each other, we do get a different type of illumination compared to some of our other lights. So if we were to take a look at our Omni, you'll notice that these areas where the light rays directly hit a surface, or where they hit a surface very, very directly, you can see we get some pretty nice illumination right in that area. But as you start to get into some of these areas where the rays begin to hit a surface a little bit more indirectly, or hit it at a little bit more of an angle, you can see that we don't get as much illumination that gets calculated in those areas. So by the time we start to get these rays that are traveling perfectly parallel to a surface, which you can see, again, looking at this floor, to look at this ray actually traveling parallel, you can see that we actually don't wind up with any illumination at all in those areas. And again, we would get the same thing with a spot, where back in here you can see we get some fairly bright illumination where these rays are hitting the surface a little bit more directly, versus kind of at the far end of this cone, where we get some of this light that is maybe not striking quite so directly, again, hitting a little bit more of an angle. Now, if you compare that to something like our direct light, where all of these light rays are hitting at the exact same angle, that means we get this perfectly even illumination all across our surface. Alright, and then finally we have the skylight. So the skylight, again, a little bit different from some of the other lights that we've looked at so far. The skylight is really meant to be used as some kind of an additional illumination source together with one of these other lights. So with this skylight, you can see that, again, this is really not any kind of a light source that comes from one particular point in space. This skylight will actually essentially surround your scene and start to illuminate basically as a surrounding light source. So you can see with this how we're getting some very, very soft, even illumination, basically coming from all directions in our scene. This can also start to give us some very, very soft, indirect shadows and things like that. So again, with this skylight, probably not meant to be used on its own, but really more in conjunction with other light types. And again, we'll have a chance to explore some of these different lights in a little bit more detail in some of our later lessons in this course. Now, we do have two additional light types, which are the Mental Ray Area Omni and the Mental Ray Area Spot. Now, these are really pretty much the exact same lights as the standard Omni or the standard Spot, but these do have a couple of additional features in here that are meant to be used with the Mental Ray rendering engine. And again, we'll take a look at these with a little bit more detail in one of our later lessons in this course. So now that we have an understanding of just what these different light types will represent as far as the kind of illumination that we'll get, what we'll start to do on our next lesson is begin exploring some of the main attributes and some of the different parameters found on these different lights.